Hello everyone. Before we begin, I'd love to know, where are you listening from tonight? And what time is it there? Now, close your eyes and listen closely to the Harrogate riddle. It was a grey morning in early October when Sherlock Holmes tossed a sealed envelope across the breakfast table toward me. The paper was thick, and the crest upon the wax seal was one I did not recognize, an intricate pattern of antlers entwined with a serpent. "Read that, Watson," Holmes said, buttering a slice of toast. "It appears we have been invited to Harrogate Manor." I opened the letter and read aloud, "Mr. Holmes, I write in desperation. My father, Lord Edwin Harrogate, has vanished without a trace from his estate on the edge of the North York moors. The grounds are sealed, the servants refuse to speak, and the villagers whisper of strange figures seen under the full moon. My family is no stranger to tragedy, but this is something else. If you value reason and truth as much as I've heard, I beg you to come at once. Sincerely, Miss Juliana Harrogate." Holmes sipped his tea. "I investigated a theft near Harrogate some years ago. The area is steeped in old money and older secrets. What do you make of it, Watson?" I considered the words. "The part about the villagers. Superstition. Perhaps," Holmes said. "Or perhaps something someone wants them to believe." 2 days later, we departed London by train. The landscape gradually transformed from autumnal woods to rolling, bracken-covered hills. Mist clung to the moors like a veil, and the further we travelled, the more Holmes's mood shifted, quieter, more introspective. At the station, a man in a thick coat waited beside a black carriage. "Mr. Holmes?" he asked. "I'm Garrick, the groundskeeper." He offered no further conversation as we made our way toward Harrogate Manor. The road wound through twisting lanes bordered by crumbling stone walls and weather-beaten trees. Sheep scattered at our approach. At last, the manor came into view, an imposing Gothic structure of grey stone and sharp gables. Its windows, darkened by grime, gave the impression of eyes watching from within. Holmes studied the facade. "They've let it rot deliberately," he muttered. "Decay as disguise." Inside, we were greeted by Miss Juliana Harrogate. Tall, pale, and dressed in mourning black despite no confirmed death. "I appreciate your coming," she said quietly. "But I fear you've arrived too late." Holmes tilted his head. "You believe your father is dead?" She hesitated. "I don't know. But someone wants me to believe it." We were taken to Lord Harrogate's study. Dust still clung to the books and furniture, and yet the hearth was cold. The man had not used this room in days. Juliana explained that her father vanished from the manor 1 week ago. His bedroom was untouched, no valuables taken, no sign of forced entry. Yet his horse remained in the stable and his coat still hung by the door. "He never left willingly," she said. Holmes knelt by the window. "Watson, note this," he said, pointing to faint scratches on the sill. "As if something was dragged, or someone climbed out." "Suicide?" I offered. Juliana shook her head. My father may have been stern, but he was not broken. He had enemies, Mr. Holmes. Even within these walls. Holmes stood slowly. Then we shall find them. The manor grew colder as the sun fell behind the distant moors. Miss Harrogate had rooms prepared for us in the east wing, a part of the house that, she admitted, had not been used in years. Father insisted it remain closed, she explained. He said it was better forgotten. Holmes, of course, was intrigued by the idea. People rarely hide rooms without reason, he muttered as we entered the shadowed corridor. The wallpaper was peeling, and a fine film of dust coated the wainscoting. Yet Holmes bent to inspect the floor, brushing aside grime to reveal faint tracks. Footprints, he said. Recent. Likely within the last few days. One person. Light, but hurried. I frowned. But the wing is locked. So we are told, Holmes replied. That night, sleep did not come easily. The wind moaned against the windows, and once, I could have sworn I heard a door creak open somewhere nearby, followed by soft footsteps. When I stepped into the hallway, it was empty, and the sounds had vanished. The following morning, Holmes insisted on speaking with the household staff. Most were reluctant, offering only evasive glances and rehearsed replies. One, however, a scullery maid named Nora, spoke freely once Miss Harrogate had stepped away. His lordship. He was frightened, sir, she said in a whisper. Kept muttering about a man with no face. Said he saw him watching from the woods. None of us believed it, thought it was the fever taking him again. Holmes leaned in. A man with no face. Nora nodded. That's what he said. Staring up from the tree line every evening. Holmes dismissed her with thanks and then turned to me. Madness, Watson? Or someone feeding fear to break a man's resolve? Could be both, I said grimly. Later that afternoon, Holmes requested Juliana accompany us into the garden where her father often walked. It was a wild tangle of overgrown hedges and sunken statuary, the sort of place where secrets could linger undisturbed. Near an ancient oak, Holmes discovered a patch of disturbed soil. No recent rains, he murmured. And yet, this was dug and refilled. We unearthed a bundle wrapped in oilskin, inside, a leather-bound notebook and a crumpled piece of paper. Holmes opened the page first. It bore only a charcoal sketch of a grotesque figure, long-limbed, cloaked in shadow, with a smudged face that seemed to twist into a featureless void. Beneath it, a single line, he walks when the mist is thickest. The notebook was Lord Harrogate's private journal. Much of it was dull, until near the end. I see him more often now. He watches at dusk. I tried to confront him, but when I approached, he vanished between the trees. Last night I heard him inside the house. I locked my door. I do not think it will matter. Holmes shut the book slowly. Either Lord Harrogate was descending into paranoia, or someone knew exactly how to break him. As dusk fell again, Holmes insisted on seeing the manor's gallery. Juliana reluctantly obliged, leading us through a long corridor hung with the stern visages of Harrogate ancestors. "Every Lord Harrogate has their portrait here," she said. "Except one." "Which?" Holmes asked. "My grandfather's younger brother, Desmond Harrogate. He died before his portrait was completed. Or so I was told." Holmes studied a blank space between two oil paintings, where faint lines of removed hooks still showed. "I suspect," he said, "that he didn't die. At least not when your family claimed he did." Juliana turned pale. "You believe he's the one my father feared?" Holmes gave a faint nod. "I believe we're not dealing with a ghost, Miss Harrogate, but a man very much alive." That night, Holmes paced restlessly in our suite in the East Wing, candlelight casting warped shadows on the walls. The blank space in the portrait gallery had lit a fire in his mind. "A name erased from history," he said. "A man supposedly dead, yet feared decades later. What could Desmond Harrogate have done to warrant such silence?" I offered a thought. "Madness in the family, perhaps." Holmes nodded. "Or something worse, something deliberate." He opened Lord Harrogate's journal again, thumbing back through earlier pages. After several minutes, he stopped. "Here. A mention of the Ash Room." He held it up for me to read. "Sometimes I dream of the Ash Room again. The black door at the end of the gallery. The sound of the child crying. No one else remembers, or pretends not to. There is no Ash Room," Juliana said when we showed her the passage. "None that I've ever heard of." "Then show us the gallery again," Holmes said. We returned to the portrait gallery by lamplight. The great eyes of past Harrogates loomed in oil and varnish. Holmes walked its length, tapping softly along the wall near the missing portrait. Then, clunk! A hollow thud. Holmes knelt, brushing his fingers over the panel. A hidden catch. Brilliantly disguised. With a soft click, the panel sprang open, revealing a narrow door of dark wood, scorched at the edges. "The Ash Room," Holmes whispered. The air inside was thick with dust and age. The room was small, with a black iron cradle in one corner, and faded wallpaper scorched in places. Ashes littered the fireplace, but no wood remained. "What is this place?" Juliana asked, voice trembling. Holmes pointed to faint carvings on the cradle side, a child's name, partially scorched. D.E.H. Desmond Harrogate, Holmes said. But not as a grown man. As a child. Later, in the Manor's records room, we found a single reference to Desmond's existence. A birth certificate, no death certificate. There was no funeral, Juliana murmured. No family story. Nothing. We turned to Garrick, the groundskeeper, who finally broke his silence. Desmond was Lord Edwin's younger brother, he said. He was troubled. Born during a storm, they used to say, and followed by trouble ever since. What sort of trouble? Holmes pressed. Animals went missing. Fires in the nursery. His mother swore she heard voices coming from him even in silence. Where did he go? Garrick hesitated. There was an accident. In this very house. The west wing burned, and Desmond disappeared. Some say he died in the fire. Others, he shook his head. Others say he went into the woods and became the man with no face. Holmes finished grimly. That evening, a heavy fog rolled in from the hills. Juliana barred the windows, her nerves frayed. I used to think the villagers' stories were nonsense, she admitted. But now I see why they feared this place. Holmes stood at the tall window, watching the mist wind through the trees. He's still here, Watson. I feel it. Someone has returned to the manor, and if he is Desmond Harrogate, then he has spent a lifetime in shadow. He turned to us. Tonight, we shall stay awake and watch. The manor was silent. The air felt charged, as though the building itself was holding its breath. Just past midnight, Holmes nudged me awake. Listen. A creak. Then another. Slow, deliberate footsteps. Coming from the east wing. Holmes opened our door quietly, lantern in hand. The corridor was pitch black, the sounds growing louder. Suddenly, a shape darted past the far end of the hallway. Holmes ran after it without a word. We gave chase, through the twisting halls of Harrogate Manor, until we reached a heavy door, one I'd never noticed before. Holmes threw it open. Empty. Dust undisturbed. But etched into the back of the door was a symbol, the same antlers and serpent from the letter. Holmes stared, unmoving. He's not just hiding, he whispered. He's hunting. The symbol on the hidden door, antlers intertwined with a serpent, was no mere decoration. Holmes copied it into his notebook and traced the lines with his finger. This wasn't drawn in haste, he murmured. It was etched deeply and with purpose. Likely decades ago. Juliana stared at it, pale. That same emblem was on the crest of the old hunting lodge. My grandfather used it in the family seal. But my father had it removed. Said it belonged to a blighted chapter in our bloodline. Holmes turned sharply. There's a lodge. She hesitated. Yes. In the woods, near the edge of the estate. It hasn't been used in years. Holmes closed his notebook with a snap. Then that is where we must go. The next morning dawned grey and wet, the fog hanging thick over the moors like wool. Garrick begrudgingly agreed to lead us to the lodge. We walked through woods of ancient yew and birch, the silence pierced only by the occasional cry of a crow. After an hour's walk, the lodge came into view, a crumbling stone structure nestled among briars, its roof sagging under the weight of time. Holmes examined the heavy door. Recently oiled, he noted. Used within the last week. Inside, the air was stale with mildew and smoke. Dust covered the floor, except for a narrow path leading from the door to a writing desk by the hearth. Holmes stooped to examine it. "Someone sat here," he said. "Recently. And for a long time." He pulled open the desk drawers and found a stack of old letters, most addressed to Lord Edwin Harrogate. The handwriting was erratic, slanted, at times barely legible. Holmes read aloud, "You took everything. You lit the fire. You wore the name that was mine. But the ash does not forget. I am the root buried beneath your family's tree. And I am growing back." We returned to the manor with the letters. Juliana read them with shaking hands. "My father never spoke of a brother. But these, they're full of hatred." Holmes nodded. "A lifetime of bitterness. Edwin inherited the title, the estate. If Desmond survived the fire, he's lived alone in exile ever since. Why wouldn't my father say anything?" "Guilt," Holmes replied. "Or fear. Perhaps both." That evening, we uncovered another clue, an old map in the library, annotated with handwritten notes in the margin. A trail was marked in red, leading from the hunting lodge to a symbol, the same antlers and serpent, drawn over a blank space labeled only Hollow Mere. Juliana furrowed her brow. "That place doesn't exist." Holmes tapped the margin. "No. But perhaps it did. Or perhaps it still does, hidden even from the family that built around it." That night, the storm came. Thunder rolled over the moors as wind battered the manor. Candles guttered in the halls. I had just settled into uneasy sleep when a scream shattered the silence. We rushed down the corridor toward Juliana's room. She stood near her bed, face ghost white. "He was here," she stammered. "In my room. I saw him. Watching." "Who?" Holmes demanded. "I don't know. But he had no face. Or it was covered. I couldn't tell. And then he was gone." We searched the manor high and low, but found no trace of the intruder. Only one thing was left behind. A single glove, damp with dew, placed upon her pillow. Holmes studied it carefully. "This man is no spirit. He is flesh and blood. And his next move will not be a warning." Later, as the wind howled and branches clawed at the windows, Holmes asked Juliana a question that startled her. "Who benefits from your father's disappearance?" "What?" She blinked. "Who inherits the estate if your father is declared dead?" She hesitated. "I do. But only if no male heir remains. My father never had sons." Holmes folded his hands. "Unless, of course, Desmond returns." The idea hung in the air like smoke. "If he proves himself alive," Holmes continued, "and can demonstrate blood relation, he could claim the manor. Especially if Edwin is gone." Juliana sank into a chair. You think all this is about inheritance? Not entirely. This is vengeance. A blood feud hidden behind generations of silence. And someone has lit the match again. We rose before dawn. Holmes, restless and grim, had not slept at all. His thoughts were consumed by the map, the symbol, and the name Hollowmere. If Desmond wanted to be found, he'd have come through the front door, Holmes said. But he wants to be feared. So we must go to him. We departed in secret, accompanied only by Garrick and a lantern. We took the trail marked on the ancient map, skirting the edge of the mist-choked moor. The air was damp and full of the scent of rotten moss. After nearly an hour's walk, Garrick slowed. "This is where it used to be," he said quietly. "There was a small lake once. Dried out when I was a boy." We stepped into a hollow depression in the earth, ringed by trees with bark like charred flesh. At the center stood a stone circle, 9 pillars, worn by time and weather. Holmes walked its edge. "It's older than the manor," he said. "And someone has been here recently." He pointed to boot prints in the mud. One man. Medium height. Broad step. Whoever he is, he came here to perform something. In the middle of the circle lay a crude effigy, twisted wood wrapped in cloth and bone. A black ribbon bound its chest. Holmes knelt beside it. Desmond's ritual. A warning, or a calling. Then, from the trees, came a whisper, "Go back." We spun around, but saw no one. Back at Harrogate Manor, the mood was colder than ever. Juliana had withdrawn into herself, pale and trembling. Garrick took to carrying a heavy walking stick and bolting all doors after dusk. That evening, Holmes studied the effigy by firelight. He dissected it carefully, removing each layer. Within its center, he found something chilling, a child's toy soldier, burned at the edges. Juliana gasped. "That was my father's. He told me it had belonged to his brother before the fire." Holmes turned it over. Scratched into the bottom were the initials DH. "This effigy is more than ritual," he said. "It is a memory, preserved in hate." Then the fire roared high in the hearth, and for a moment, we all saw it, a face in the flame. Hollow eyes, no features. A blur of shadow that seemed to grin. Then it vanished, and the room plunged into silence. That night, Lord Edwin Harrogate returned. Or so we thought. Juliana burst into our room in the dead of night, shouting that she had seen her father walking the hallways. We followed her to the west corridor, where Holmes discovered a trail of muddy footprints, bare feet, wide set, leading from the servants' stairwell. We followed them to the cellar. There, crouched in the darkness, was a man, wild-eyed, with grey hair and soiled clothes, muttering nonsense to the stone walls. Holmes approached cautiously. "Lord Harrogate." The man looked up. His eyes were empty, his face unshaven. Ash in the mouth, roots in the blood, Juliana gasped. "That's not him. That's not my father." Holmes stepped closer. "Then who are you?" The man stared at him, then whispered, "I am what's left." We carried the man upstairs, cleaned and fed him. He had moments of clarity between the madness, enough for Holmes to question him. "You're Desmond, aren't you?" The man smiled with broken teeth. "He tried to burn me. Thought the fire would end it. But the fire woke me." "You lived in the woods all these years?" He nodded slowly. "The roots kept me. The soil remembered." Juliana sat stiffly nearby. "Why come back now?" Desmond looked at her with hollow eyes. "Because I was forgotten. And the forgotten must always return." Holmes asked one last question. "Where is your brother?" Desmond smiled. "Underneath. Where the ash goes. The house remembers." Holmes ordered Garrick to bring tools. He remembered the hollow sound beneath the study floor, the place Lord Harrogate was last seen. We pried up the floorboards and discovered a stone trapdoor. With great effort, we forced it open. A narrow tunnel led downward into the dark. We followed it by lantern, winding beneath the manor for what seemed like ages, until it opened into a vast chamber, earthen walls, wooden beams, and in the center, a chair. And in the chair, what remained of Lord Edwin Harrogate. His face was calm, his eyes closed, hands folded neatly in his lap. He was quite dead. Above him, scrawled in charcoal on the wall, were the words, "One brother for another." "The house is balanced." Juliana stared at her father's body in silence. Holmes laid a hand on her shoulder, but she didn't move. The air in the underground chamber was cold and heavy, like a grave. Holmes examined the scene carefully. "He's been here for weeks at least. Preserved by the damp. No wounds, no sign of a struggle." "He was placed here," I said. "Deliberately." Holmes nodded. "A twisted ceremony. One brother replacing another. Desmond likely kept him alive for a time, then ended it quietly, as though fulfilling a rite." Juliana backed away, covering her mouth. "This place, it was never part of the original house." "No," Holmes said, "this was built later. Secretly. A place to bury sins beneath stone. We sealed the chamber and informed the authorities, but Holmes insisted Desmond not be moved. Let him stay in his own prison, he said. He's been haunting this house for decades, but now the house haunts him. The next morning, we found Desmond Harrogate gone. His bed was empty, the door unbarred. No footprints, no noise. As though he had vanished into the walls themselves. Holmes only sighed. The house let him go. What do you mean? I asked. He stared out the library window toward the moor. He lived in its roots. It fed his madness, cloaked him in mystery. He was the ghost of Harrogate long before we arrived. Juliana stood beside us. What happens now? Holmes gave a rare pause. You inherit the estate, legally. But spiritually, I suspect it will always belong to him. She turned her eyes toward the woods. Then I won't stay. I'll sell it. Let the trees have it back. Holmes spent the day packing our belongings. Yet I saw he was unsettled. He'd solved the case, uncovered the killer, but something gnawed at him. In the afternoon, he returned alone to the portrait gallery. I followed, quietly. He stood before the empty frame, the one where Desmond's image had been. Then, he noticed something beneath the wallpaper. Holmes pulled back a corner to reveal a faint sketch. Not of Desmond, but of both brothers, drawn as children. They stood hand in hand, one smiling, the other blank-eyed. Their names were scrawled beneath, Edwin and Desmond. Even after all the hate, Holmes murmured, someone tried to remember him. I asked who drew it. Holmes glanced sideways. Perhaps the mother. Perhaps Desmond himself. Or perhaps the house did. We left Harrogate Manor that evening, the skies finally clearing after days of storm. Juliana rode with us to the station. She said little, her face pale but resolute. I will burn what's left, she said quietly. Not out of spite, but mercy. No one else should live with that silence. At the platform, she paused before boarding her carriage. Thank you both for giving my family an end. Holmes tipped his hat. May you never dream of Ash again. We watched her vanish down the road, then boarded our own train for London. Weeks passed. The case faded into obscurity, as most strange affairs do. No one truly believed Desmond Harrogate had survived, let alone haunted the manor for decades. Most dismissed the affair as tragic madness. But Holmes, he remained thoughtful. One evening, I found him staring into the fireplace again, fingers steepled. What truly bothers me, he said slowly, is how easily Desmond disappeared. As though he knew the paths no man should know. As though the house was alive, and he was part of its breath. I asked if he thought Desmond still lived. Holmes didn't answer. But later, he showed me a letter that had arrived, unsigned, postmarked from Devon. I forgive her. She did not set the fire. He did. I only ever wanted the truth. D. Holmes folded the letter. He's still watching. But not for vengeance. For peace. It was late November when Holmes received another letter. I found him reading it by candlelight, expression unreadable. He slid it across the table to me without a word. It is not over. The house dreams still. Come to Harrogate, one last time. Bring only truth. The envelope bore no stamp, no seal, only the imprint of the serpent and antlers, pressed into the paper with some dark wax. I blinked at Holmes. Is it Desmond? I believe so, he said. And if the house is indeed dreaming, then some fragment of it remains awake. I felt a chill. I thought Juliana burned it. Holmes folded the letter. She tried. But some things resist the flame. When we arrived, Harrogate Manor was little more than a ruin. The roof had collapsed in places, the ivy was choking the last standing windows, and the great hall was blackened with soot. The stench of burned wood and damp stone clung to everything. Juliana was not there. Locals said she had vanished a month after the fire, sold the estate for a pittance and disappeared from London society. And yet, someone had been living there. In a back room, hidden behind fallen beams, Holmes found a small cot, fresh blankets, and a stack of pages covered in a frantic scrawl. He read the topmost one aloud. There is a room between the walls. It was never meant to be found. He built it for silence. I filled it with truth. Holmes closed his eyes. We must find that room. Using the original estate plans and Holmes's memory, we searched for hours. Finally, near the west wing, behind the collapsed wine cellar, Holmes discovered a narrow vertical crawl space. It led into a gap between walls, no more than a few feet wide, and a small iron door. He pried it open with effort. Inside was a chamber no larger than a cupboard, and yet every inch of its walls was covered in drawings. Portraits, symbols, and phrases, some in Latin, others in jagged English. Faces looked out from the wall, Edwin, Juliana, and again, Desmond's own, each one slightly more distorted. In the center of the floor lay an old journal, wrapped in wax cloth. Holmes opened it carefully. It began, "They called me mad. But the house remembers. The house sees. And now you see, too." For days, Holmes pored over the journal. It detailed Desmond's exile in the woods, his obsession with family memory, and his belief that the manor was not merely haunted by ghosts, but by the memory of itself. A house has a soul. When fire took its flesh, it grew new skin in shadow. Holmes read that passage several times. "This is more than madness," he said. "It's a philosophy." He believed Harrogate became sentient through suffering. He blamed the house, I said. Not just Edwin. Indeed. And now, it seems, he wants us to absolve it. I laughed bitterly. You cannot absolve stone. Holmes simply said, "We shall try." Our last night in the ruin, Holmes asked me to return to the stone circle at Hollow Mere. "The roots begin there," he said. "If Desmond left anything behind, it's waiting there." We went by lantern light. The fog rolled low, as before, and silence pressed in. The effigy was gone, but in its place lay a pile of ash and bone. Holmes knelt and touched it. "This is Desmond," he said softly. I knelt beside him. He burned himself, or offered himself to the house, as payment, or as release. He pulled something from the ashes, a ring, blackened by flame. The Harrogate seal. The antlers. The serpent. "Now the house is balanced," Holmes said again. As he wished. We did not speak much as we returned from Hollow Mere. Holmes held the ring tightly in his hand, staring out at the twisted woods as if listening for something I could not hear. "The house is finished," I said. "Desmond is gone. The ashes are all that remain." Holmes did not reply immediately. Then he said, "And yet the ground does not feel still." That night, back in the crumbled manor, he could not sleep. I found him walking the halls, as if mapping something only he could see. He paused before the scorched library door. "This room was the heart," he murmured. "Not because of knowledge, but because it remembered the most pain." He stepped over the threshold, and the air shifted. There was a creak, a gust of air, and then, unmistakably, a whisper. "Sherlock!" He turned to me sharply. "Did you hear that?" I nodded, though my skin prickled with doubt. "Yes, I think I did." The next morning, Holmes unearthed a small, scorched strongbox hidden behind the collapsed stairwell. Inside was a book, preserved by the box's thick iron. It was Juliana's diary. He read it aloud by firelight that night, seated in what remained of the west parlor. I knew the house would never let me go. I burned it, but the stone dreamed on. I see Desmond in my sleep. I see Father in his chair beneath the world. The house is not bricks, it is memory with walls. Page after page detailed her slow descent into fear, how after selling the estate, she began hearing tapping at her windows, smelling ash in her rented flat in London. I carry it with me. The weight of Harrogate is not in the ground. It is in the blood. I fear I, too, will vanish. The last page was blank, except for one sentence. He was not the last. Holmes stared at that final sentence for a long time. She feared becoming like them, I said. Holmes nodded. Because Desmond's madness was not his alone. It was grown from a seed buried deep, one his family watered for generations. He shut the book. This house, this family, were not haunted by ghosts, Watson. They were haunted by forgetting. By generations who buried truth in the walls, who refused to speak of pain until it festered into madness. And what becomes of it now? That depends, he said, rising, on whether we bury the truth again, or let it live in light. As we prepared to leave Harrogate for the final time, Holmes asked me to mail a letter. "Send it to Scotland Yard," he said. "Let them know everything, but tell them the manor is not to be rebuilt. It is to be left to the earth." I glanced at the envelope. It was addressed not to any officer, but to Juliana Harrogate. "She's gone," I reminded him. "No one knows where." He gave a rare, gentle smile. "Even so. Perhaps the house will know where to find her." Inside was a short message. "The roots are at peace. Your brother sleeps. So may you. S.H." We left the manor at dawn. As we crossed the moor, Holmes stopped once and turned to look back. The sun was rising through the twisted trees, and for a moment, the burned ruin seemed almost golden, as if it had become part of the land that birthed it. "I wonder," I said, "whether the house was always this way, or whether we brought the haunting with us." Holmes didn't answer. But later, on the train, he whispered, "Every place holds memory, Watson. Some remember joy. Others remember fire. But only the worst ones remember us." Months passed. Winter blanketed London in frost and silence. The Harrogate affair faded from the news, and Holmes returned to his routines, though something had shifted. He no longer played the violin at midnight. His mornings were spent poring over maps of English estates, and he occasionally muttered about houses that remember. One morning, I found him brushing soot off an old letter we had overlooked, buried under notes from the case. It was unsigned but unmistakably written by Juliana Harrogate. There was always one room I was not allowed in. At the end of the East Hall, behind the linen cupboard. Father said it was for servants, but none ever went in. I've never opened it. But in dreams, I hear music. Holmes tapped the letter thoughtfully. "I think we missed something." The manor was supposed to be condemned, but Holmes pulled strings, writing letters to land agents, historic societies, and even one obscure society of architectural mystics. We returned under cover of fog, climbing through a side window, boots crunching ash. The east wing was badly damaged, most of the ceiling fallen in. But the corridor remained. Behind the linen cupboard, now rotted and eaten by mold, Holmes found a small door, sealed shut by rust. He pried it open with his cane, coughing at the cloud of dust. Inside, a tiny room, untouched by fire. It was circular, with no windows. A piano stood in the center. A child's piano, ivory key stained and cracked. On the lid, in faded ink, for D.H. may he find his tune. Holmes whispered, "A music room." Built-in secret. Holmes pressed one key. It groaned, a note like a dying breath. He tried another, then another. A melody formed, simple, sad, like a lullaby long forgotten. Suddenly, the air shifted. From somewhere deep in the walls, we heard movement. Not footsteps, but resonance. As if the house were responding to the tune. Holmes paused. Desmond wasn't mad. He remembered a song no one else did. This was his sanctuary. He opened the lid. Inside lay pages of music. His own compositions, scribbled in graphite and tears. One page bore a title, "The House with No Voice." I asked what it meant. Holmes said, it means he was always trying to speak. But no one would hear. Outside the manor, in a thicket near the old well, Holmes found a patch of earth unnaturally soft. He began to dig. There, beneath the roots, lay a small, iron box wrapped in wax cloth. Inside, a lock of hair, a crayon drawing of two boys under a tree, and a note. For Edwin. "I forgive you." Holmes closed the box carefully. Desmond buried his last anger here. This is where the haunting ended. Not in fire, but in forgiveness. We left the grave untouched. Some memories, Holmes said, are meant to rest exactly where they were buried. Back in London, a letter arrived for Holmes. The envelope was identical to the one he'd sent months ago to Juliana Harrogate. But inside was a blank sheet, except for a single pressed violet and one faint sentence in Juliana's hand: "It's quiet now." Holmes stared at it for a long time, then placed it on the mantel beside his pipe. "That's the end," he said at last. "No," I replied. "That's peace." A full year passed before Holmes mentioned Harrogate again. It was late spring, and the city was blooming with life: flowers in Hyde Park, laughter on the streets, and a rare warmth in the air. Yet Holmes seemed colder than usual. Reflective. "I have been thinking," he said over tea one morning, "about places that hold on to people." I set down my cup. "You mean haunted places?" "Not by spirits," he replied, "but by unresolved truths. Harrogate was one. But there are others." I waited for more, but he merely stared into the fire, where no flames yet burned. That night, he wrote a letter to Juliana Harrogate, though he never sent it. I later found it, tucked into one of his notebooks. "You gave the house back to the soil." That was mercy. But I wonder if it ever truly lets you go. Or if it waits, still, beneath the roots, dreaming. By midsummer, Holmes had acquired a new obsession: mapping estates across England with similar histories, places marked by inexplicable disappearances, hidden rooms, and stories of madness passed down in whispers. He compiled a list. 47 names. Each one, he told me, contains an echo. Harrogate was not unique. He visited several. Old abbeys, abandoned cottages, manors forgotten by time. Always alone. And always returning with the same look in his eyes, as if he had touched something not meant for touch. "Are you hunting ghosts now?" I once asked. "No," he answered. "I am cataloguing memory." One estate in particular drew his attention: Dunwick Grange, near the Welsh border. It had lain empty for over 2 decades after the last owner, an archivist, was found dead in a locked study, surrounded by broken mirrors. Holmes invited me on this journey. Inside the manor, we found a hall of mirrors, each angled precisely, creating the illusion of a corridor that stretched to infinity. At the far end stood a single chair, facing nothing. Holmes examined the mirrors and found inscriptions behind several. One said, "What you forget is what sees you best." Another, "Echoes do not fade. They wait." Holmes looked back through the glass corridor and whispered, "This is Harrogate's cousin." We visited 3 more estates. At each, we found the same. Rooms walled up, journals left behind, drawings of doors that did not exist. In one, a child scrawled on plaster, "The room is listening." In another, etched into a wine cellar beam, "Tell the house you're sorry." Back in Baker Street, Holmes placed all the sketches, writings, and artifacts upon the floor, dozens of them, and began to connect them with red twine, pins, and notes. He called it the memory network. "I believe," he said slowly, "there is an unspoken history of England. Written not in books, but in rooms." I thought he was speaking in metaphor. Until he added, "and they're still listening." Holmes began compiling what he called the Whisper Archive, a collection of tales, objects, floor plans, and folklore surrounding houses with memory. One entry read, "Harrogate opened its eyes through fire, closed them with forgiveness." Another, "Dunwich stares at its own reflection endlessly." One final note simply said, "There is a door beneath the ground. When opened, it forgets your name. And so do you." I did not ask what it meant. But I knew this was no longer a single case. It was a lifetime's work. And Holmes, the man of logic, had become its custodian. Holmes's obsession with the memory network deepened. We traveled to remote villages, ancient estates, and forgotten ruins, chasing whispers of secret chambers and rooms that should not exist. One cold autumn evening, Holmes received a note, delivered by hand. It bore no signature, only a single sentence: "The door you seek lies beneath the oldest oak in Wychwood Forest." We set out at dawn. Wychwood was vast and tangled, its trees ancient and knotted. The oldest oak stood in a clearing, its roots sprawling like serpents across the earth. Holmes examined the ground carefully. Near the base of the tree, hidden beneath moss and soil, was a circular stone. He pushed it aside, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. We descended cautiously, lanterns in hand. The air grew cold and damp, smelling of earth and forgotten time. The stairs opened into a vast cavern, walls covered in carvings, faces, symbols, words in languages neither of us recognized. At the center of the cavern stood a massive door, carved from dark wood and bound with iron. It was old, far older than any manor house. Holmes traced the carvings with reverence. "This is not a house," he said softly. "It's a gate." The carvings depicted stories of families lost, memories trapped, and the price of forgetting. Holmes searched the cavern and found a pedestal holding a rusted iron key, shaped like an ancient tree. "This must open the door," he said. I noticed inscriptions on the door's frame. "To open the past, you must first remember the name." Holmes studied it and then whispered, "We must speak a name aloud to enter." We stood in silence. Holmes closed his eyes and said slowly, "Desmond Harrogate." The door trembled. With a grinding sound, it began to open, revealing a passage bathed in pale blue light. Inside was a room filled with thousands of small glass orbs, each glowing faintly. Holmes approached and picked one up. Inside it was a scene, a family gathering, laughter, a birthday party, moments frozen in time. "This is a repository of memory," Holmes said. He held up another orb, this one darker, showing the burning of Harrogate Manor. "These are echoes of lives lived, joys lost, and pains endured." Suddenly, Holmes's face darkened. This room holds everything, and it holds the power to forget. A voice, gentle but firm, filled the chamber. Choose, Sherlock Holmes. Will you preserve the memories, or release them to the void? Holmes stared at the orbs. Memories can be blessings or curses, he said slowly. To forget is to lose, but to remember without peace is to suffer. He turned to me. What would you do, Watson? I answered honestly, I would choose peace. Holmes nodded and reached toward the orbs. Holmes's hand hovered over the glowing orbs, his eyes reflecting their eerie light. The voice whispered again, soft as a sigh. To preserve is to carry the weight forever. To release is to surrender the past. He selected one orb, its surface shimmered like liquid glass, and crushed it gently in his palm. A rush of images flooded the chamber, children playing beneath the oaks, Juliana's laughter, Desmond's despair, the fire that consumed the manor. All faded into mist. The remaining orbs flickered, some darkened, others brightened. Holmes exhaled slowly. It is done. The blue light dimmed, and the door began to close. Emerging from the cavern, the dawn broke over Witchwood Forest in golden hues. Holmes looked weary but peaceful. The house, the memories, they no longer bind the living, he said. I felt the weight of the case lift from my shoulders. Do you believe the past can truly be released? Holmes gave a rare smile. Perhaps it is not about release, Watson. Perhaps it is about understanding. Back in Baker Street, Holmes began organizing his findings. The memory network, he decided, was a map not just of haunted places, but of human grief and hope intertwined. He wrote in his journal, "A memory is a house with many rooms. Some we must enter. Others we must leave closed." And with that, the Harrogate riddle came to its close. Weeks after the Witchwood revelation, London was gripped by a dense fog that seemed to swallow sound and light. The streets were eerily silent, and the usual bustle faded into whispers. Holmes and I sat by the window of 221B, the gas lamps outside casting a dim glow through the mist. "Watson," Holmes said quietly, "the memory network does not end with houses. It extends into the very fabric of this city. The fog itself carries echoes." I looked at him, puzzled. "Come," he said. "We must investigate." We walked into the fog, our footsteps muffled. Holmes paused, listening. "Do you hear it, Watson?" Voices. Not from the living, but from the forgotten. Through the haze, figures appeared, shadowy, indistinct, passing by without acknowledgement. Holmes approached one and spoke softly. "Who are you?" The figure faded, leaving behind a scent of old paper and smoke. Holmes nodded gravely. "These are memories lost to the city, trapped between moments, unable to move on." We traced the fog to an abandoned building near the Thames, a former library closed decades ago. Inside, the air was thick with dust and silence. In the back room, we found an old phonograph, still spinning a cracked record. The music played a haunting tune, one that matched the melody from the hidden room at Harrogate. Holmes whispered, "The city remembers too. Not just houses." As we left the library, Holmes paused. "The fog is a veil. It hides truths, but it also reveals them." He pulled from his coat a small glass orb, the last remaining from the cavern beneath Witchwood. Holding it up, he said, "This is the last memory. The one that binds the city and the past." The fog thickened around us, and in that moment, I understood, memory is not just a place, it is a presence. The fog clung to London like a shroud, thickening as night fell. Holmes and I returned to Baker Street, the weight of the city's forgotten memories heavy in the air. Holmes sat by the fire, the glass orb resting on the table before him. "Watson," he said softly, "every story has an end, but every memory seeks a place to rest." I watched as he gently placed the orb into a small wooden box, sealing it with a quiet reverence. "This," he continued, "is not just the end of a case. It is a promise to honor what came before and to let it go." The next morning, Holmes and I took a carriage to the edge of the city, to a quiet cemetery tucked beneath ancient trees. There, beneath a simple stone, Holmes buried the wooden box. He placed a hand on the earth and whispered, "May the memories find peace." The city seemed to breathe a little easier after that. Back at 221B, Holmes reflected on all we had uncovered. The Harrogate riddle, he said, was not about fire or madness, but about memory, how it shapes us, haunts us, and sometimes heals us. He looked at me with a calm intensity. "Watson, never forget. To live fully, we must embrace the past but not be imprisoned by it." And so, dear listener, whether you are far or near, awake or drifting into sleep, I invite you to carry these stories with you. From London's fog to Harrogate's ashes, the past whispers in many voices. Tell me, from where do you listen? What time holds your world? May these tales bring you peace, and perhaps a gentle reminder that even the darkest memories can find their rest.